This episode is sponsored by Vaultoro. Keep on listening and you'll find out more about how you can buy allocated gold when the Bitcoin bull run reaches its peak. This way, you don't have to deal with infinitely inflationary fiat or banks that freeze your account. Also, note that trading involves risks and the information presented is not financial advice. This episode is also sponsored by Wasabi Wallet. Go to wasabiwallet.io, download Wasabi for your OS, and significantly boost your network level and transaction privacy. Hello there, and welcome to Season 9, Episode 3 of the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. I am Vlad, and my guest today is Joshua Scigala, who is the CEO of Vaultoro, is an old-time Bitcoiner who has been involved in the space since the early days, like I think 2009. And also, he's a very big fan of this spirit of voluntaryism, as well as anarcho capitalism. And he sometimes likes to have this debate from a point of view which has no in-between, has no middle ground, goes to the absolute extreme of free market capitalism. And this is the kind of conversation that we'll be having today, I guess. So hello, Joshua.
Hey, how are you, man? I mean, it wasn't 2009, it was more like late 2010. But yeah, long enough.
I remember watching that video of you just, trying to defend Bitcoin when it fell to $2 or something. People making fun of you in the comments. Good times.
Yeah, weird. And it's the same arguments still. That's the funny thing. It's still the same arguments. Either, no, Bitcoin's too expensive now, or, if just every other FUD that's the same.
So let me start up by giving you some credit, because it was your idea that I should do a season that's based on philosophy. And basically you wanted me to interview people and ask them why we are here. And the purpose of this is to remind everyone listening that Bitcoiners, especially in the early days, had some ideals and principles, and it wasn't necessarily about institutions that get in. It wasn't about big investors like MicroStrategy and Michael Saylor, who get a lot of praise nowadays. It was mostly ideology. And that might just be one of the biggest reasons why Bitcoin has succeeded and is such a big and resilient network nowadays. Because people in the early days, they did not care much about getting rich and were mostly about freedom and only cared about sovereignty and all of these ideals that they could only accomplish through Bitcoin. So let me start by asking you, why did you get into Bitcoin in the first place?
Yeah, hey, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this series. It's really cool. I mean, yeah, the initial reason why I got into Bitcoin, because I was already looking for this solution, and I was looking for years and didn't think it was possible because of the double spend problem. But then I found it. But the reason why I was looking for years is because I ran a site where people swapped things back and forth. So they would swap physical goods. It was a sort of first online swapping site. And I could tell that was really inefficient, but I didn't, because, if you have a jacket that I really love, but I have nothing you like, then the deal falls through. And that's crap, because there's a whole market there, and we should just have some sort of token which you can have, and then you can choose something else from somebody else, and that just makes everything more fluid. Of course, then you have money. And I was looking, because I didn't want to just have credits on a database, because I would then just be the central bank. The whole point was to have an alternative economy. And I didn't want to reinvent banking. So I was looking for I didn't call it token, there was credits or something like that. But even the word credit is a misnomer, because you're then looking at issuing a debt, because it's a credit. We owe you something. And that's where Bitcoin really changed everything, because it's not a debt, it's not a credit, it's a token, it's a money, it's a true money. It's a debt. It's a bearer-based instrument. It's something that you find out of these rare numbers that these miners go hunting for, and they find it into existence instead of lending it into existence. And so, yeah. Anyway, I was keeping my ear to the ground, to the railroad, I guess you say. Trying to listen for anything that murmurs in that sort of industry, and so I was pretty blessed to find the white paper and fairly early on, and continued on that train of wasting money on alpaca socks and all sorts of stuff that you did in the early days.
Oh, there are lots of people who regret that. But was there any philosophical justification beyond this utility aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I started looking for answers when 9/11 happened, and those towers came tumbling down, and my thing was always sort of follow the money or understand, and so I was looking at money, and I'm trying to understand the markets and the who made money from that, where did money, and of course you go down the rabbit hole of where did money come from, who how does it even arrive to, and of course then you start going into deeper rabbit holes and off into side corners of the internet, and then eventually reading Murray Rothbard and these types of philosophers and economists, and you eventually get to a point of, wow, this is there's so much more to economics than just money. It's how everything works. And then you start looking at violence and what it means to have an entire system that is backed up by violence. So every country has rules, and if you don't follow those rules, no matter how small they are, if you don't pay your television tax, then you'll get a letter, and then you'll won't pay that, and you'll get a stronger letter, and then you won't pay that, and they'll ask you to come to court, and then you won't go to court, and then they'll eventually bring police officers to your apartment. If you resist the police officers, they'll use violence. And so everything that, even with the smallest laws, they're all backed up by the monopoly of the use or the initiation of the use of force. And what I found was that if you're reading some of these great economists / philosophers, is that there could be another way. We could have ways where we don't have a monopoly on the use of force. So the government is a geographical monopoly on the use of force, and then on top of that, there's of course the monopoly on the issuance of debt and everything else that comes along with that. But really, this was what aligned a lot with where I'd already gone in terms of my thinking when it came to economic theory and the love of Austrian economics and maybe also the philosophies of early cyberpunks and understanding philosophies of freedom of the internet and how they could be branched out to further on, into basically coming into reality rather than just being in virtual worlds.
Okay, but let me ask you this question: who builds the roads?
Yeah, I mean, this is the wonderful meme, really, that every ANCAP takes. But you've got to ask, like, who builds the roads now? And a lot of the time it's private contractors anyway. But let's just step back a bit and think about who builds the houses, because in a communist or socialist state, you would have government departments building houses for people, and it would be sort of weird to think that a private company could do that. It's kind of strange. But let's say in a society that's truly free market and there is no state, basically you would build a building. Well, you're not going to build a building just to have it as a building. So part of the cost for that building would be attaching that building to a road, and that payment would be part of the building costs. And you can, we've got technology now to track people on your road and charge them, or not allow people to go down your road because they might have might not be the type of people you want on your road. I don't know. Like, this is the other thing about anarcho capitalism. If I knew all the answers, then I should actually be calling for total dictatorship because I know all the answers. But I don't. But what I can put forth in conversations like these are simple ideas. And that's not to say that they are the true and one answer to these things. Things happen slowly. They happen through cultural shift and cultural change. And a lot of people get angry when they hear philosophies of voluntarism or anarcho capitalism, because they think like, how dare you don't care about poor people, or you don't care about the hospitals, or whatever their belief is. They'll say that, but actually, sort of lost my train of thought there. But the fact of the matter is that if we're explaining anarcho-capitalism, you always get people very angry at you, even if you say that, hey, the roads might be built by private people and you could track them along that road. What? Tracking? What? So we don't actually know how that would work, but someone would figure it out because we love roads.
Oh yeah. And let me ask you, what is this link between anarcho-capitalism and voluntaryism?
Well, I think it's more that anarcho-capitalism has somehow chosen the two most loaded words and mashed them together. So if you say you're an anarchist, that's somehow crazy and you nut job and you're like, I don't know, Antifa or like what, and then mashed it with capitalism, which is also totally misunderstood. Totally, everyone's got an idea in their head what capitalism means. It's the root of all evil, apparently, with a lot of people. And to some other people, it's just a way of that the rich get richer and the poor see the picture. I don't know. It's two loaded words, and so that's why a lot of people like voluntarism, because it's kind of a new word. You understand that everything's voluntary. By you volunteering to do something, that is instead of being forced to do something. So it's kind of similar to Bitcoin. You voluntarily add to the network by accepting Bitcoin.
So is it voluntarism or voluntaryism? Because there is I've always pronounced it as voluntaryism.
Yeah, I know. I have to, because I just constantly have to look up the right spelling for the right one. It's voluntaryism. I think there's a double, yeah.
Anyway,
E-Y.
That's kind of a redundant question, because in the context, you've already defined what it means and what it does. And I wanted to ask you, what is the difference between agorism and voluntaryism?
Yeah, I mean, there's such a broad, this is the sad thing about philosophy in general, the art of thinking, is that there are so many nuances that people lose track of what is what, and they start to go off down these separate paths. And I feel that this is this sort of divide and conquer mechanisms when all I do is look for what is a way to have zero state, but stay on first principles. So I can't actually tell you what the difference is, because there's so many, like, if I ask one agorist what one difference is and then another agorist, they'll take totally different things. But the fact of the matter is, if we just bring it back to basic blocks, so we say, what are the basic blocks of voluntarism? Well, the basic blocks are basically what you teach a child. Don't hit, don't steal, and that's kind of it. Don't hit and don't steal, right? So don't initiate force and don't steal. Now, if you take that from first principles, well, then you need to go down further down a philosophical thought of well, what is ownership, right? Because ownership is really at the root of this entire philosophy. You have to say, is there such thing as ownership? Because communists would say everything should be owned by everyone and you shouldn't have private property. But that's quite a simple answer to go up against, because you could say, well, do you own yourself? This is where I start. Do you own yourself? And people would say, well, yeah. Most people that are, because if you don't own yourself, then you are a slave. What are you but a slave if you don't own yourself? If somebody else owns you. So most people in their right mind would say, yes, I own myself. And you say, well, okay, so if you own yourself, then if you find some dirt that belongs to nobody and is the ground, and you with your hands that you own, you make a pot out of that, do you have the right? Is that now yours? Is that now yours to do whatever you want with, including to sell or to smash? And some people would say, no. I mean, but I fail to see how that could possibly be argued. Because if you take it on the negative, if you ask the exact same person, well, okay, instead of making a pot, I take my hands and I murder someone, I stab them, then I have to own that murder too, because I own myself and I took myself, the own thing, and I did something and I had an action. And most people in their right mind go, yeah, actually, you do have to own that because you just murdered someone. You have to own up to that. You have to take ownership of that action and be punished for it. In a proper society, you obviously punish those that murder other people. And really, that's the seed for voluntarism. You own yourself. And with yourself, you make things, whether they're good or bad, and you take ownership of those things. And then you go from there.
It's certainly interesting how it goes back to such an easy to understand principle when you have so many ideologies today that have so many extensions, and there's so much depth to everything. But somehow we forget to take our situations to some very simple real life examples. And we appeal to authorities and different, the Constitution, the different rules of the party, whatever book somebody had written at some point. Yet at the same time, we are unable most of the times to explain why it's like that with very simple examples, which take it back to basically the primitive man and the rudimentary interactions and needs that we were doing, and explain why this is necessary and why this is excessive.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I mean by different philosophies, is that you start to go down different, too granular paths where everyone, oh, well, if you're that sort of philosophy, then that's wrong because of this, that, and the other thing. And really, let's bring it back to first principles. Don't hit and don't steal. And these are these are secular ethics as well that most people would agree with, meaning you don't really need to be a God-fearing person to agree with those principles. And funnily enough, that's also a very important part of this philosophy, is that both if you believe in a God or a predetermined future or a deterministic world, then you could still agree with this principle either or ways, So I feel that getting back to some sort of first principle on a secular ethical grounding is a really important place to start for a philosophy that is actually, quite dangerous. Like, talking about these types of philosophies are dangerous. I mean, we saw like Karl Marx is talking about at this level of philosophy, and look what happens. You have gulags. You have people misinterpreting or interpreting the way, I don't know. Just using his writings to create death and destruction and suffering unimaginable. And so when people do philosophize about really ground level societal changes, it's important that things are thought about very, very specifically, and this is, I think, the only downfall to anarcho capitalism, is that by definition, you want to try to just not have a central controller that has all the answers, right? You want to try to let it evolve. And this is where I think you really do want sort of startup cities that compete, because there you can have failures and those failures won't be too massive. Whereas if you get a massive country like, I don't know, the USA, and go, right, now we're Ancapistan, then if it goes in the wrong direction, it could be also very terrible. So it'd be nice to have startup cities that actually try these philosophies and see how they evolve, rather than some sort of dictatorial person that interprets the thoughts of philosophers down this ilk in the wrong way and ends up causing hardship and pain.
Right. And something which I appreciate about your examples and the way that you present these very simple principles is that you present it in terms of people being consensual and at the same time working together towards a goal without establishing some form of leadership. Whereas most people who read, I don't know if most people is the right way of phrasing it, but in our history, we have had very radical ideas that were about mostly decentralizing. But people have read them and thought, this is going to take a very long time, so why don't I just take these teachings, establish a system which puts them into practice, but at the same time turn myself into the leader who brings the revolution and makes this happen. And maybe that along the way we are going to decentralize. But that's how we had communism, that's how we had fascism, that's how we had the Nazis. It's just really terrible, because you might have some very good ideas, but they end up in the hands of the wrong people. And there is no way you can guarantee that the good intentions that you have had in the very beginning are going to be maintained all throughout the existence of that type of polity. Let's call it a polity, like a political organization. And one of my concerns is very similar in regards to Bitcoin, because the intentions were very good, and I very much cheer for grassroots adoption, with more users joining the network, more people mining, more people running nodes, more people making transactions, setting up wallets, becoming sovereign, as opposed to just cheering for corporations and governments that get into Bitcoin, because that will not end well. We have seen what happens with Tesla and Elon Musk and how fast they can fall out of grace. And that's just one small example. It can get a lot worse with governments. And to them, it's not about helping anyone get more freedom. It's all about control. It's just about getting some sort of first mover advantage in this new world, which is exciting and is promising, but to squash it and strip it of every ounce of sovereignty and every ounce of freedom, and just turn themselves into the leaders. So I tend to disregard everything from Bitcoin ideas to philosophies that try to impose themselves in a top-down kind of manner, revolutions from above. Those tend to end up badly, and we have a long history to prove it.
Absolutely. It's the nature of the beast that if you want to overthrow a government or a mafia or some sort of power structure, then generally you have to be a very charismatic, violent individual that is ready to take arms and go for it. So these sorts of individuals usually have some sort of child trauma as well, so they're very angry, and they once they get to that top, once they've done that, they want to stay. They don't want to go anywhere. They want to stay. They're like, yes, we're here, and I have all the answers, and then they stay, and then it's like meet the new boss, same as the old. It's very different, and this is kind of why I like Bitcoin, because it wasn't really a revolution in banking. It's more of an evolution, and really, I know that sounds very sort of typical and catchphrasy, but it truly is. And evolutions are a much, much better way to go. And evolutions happen through cultural change, where people just get sick of the crap. And what I really love about crypto is that it allows for evolution in a cultural sense, where we start to just take power away from the states in terms of, well, I don't know. Let's have a look at, like, I don't know, something like where we look at, let's say, taxis, for instance, where maybe a bunch of people crowdsource a self-driving car through some sort of crypto mechanism, and that self-driving car is autonomous. It's owned by the crowd, and then it goes off and plays taxi and starts earning money, and as soon as it earns enough money, it buys a daughter cab, and that daughter cab can rolls off the production line and is also sovereign towards, the mother cab, I guess. It's weird, but it and as people always try to take advantage of robots, maybe the mother cab would first test any upgrades on the daughter cab just to make sure that no less profits are being had, and then and then eventually there would be a fleet of cabs that would happen, enough to serve everybody and cheap enough so that everyone could have transport. All of a sudden, you have a free market mechanism for transport, and we don't need the state to offer public transport. So there you made the state not needed for that component. And let's try the next component and the next component and the next, until we get to the roads. But this is the sort of futuristic dream. And this is also funny, because whenever I talk, I was just going back to what I was saying before, where people get really angry at these concepts, weirdly enough. Is that you say, well, look, I'm living in La La Land sci-fi world, really, when I think of anarcho capitalism or voluntaryism. I'm sort of just having thought games on how it could look, maybe, because really, it's going to be a while until we have a fleet of self-sovereign cabs. maybe not that long, I don't know.
Vaultoro, and that's V-A-U-L-T, like a gold vault, and O-R-O, oro, which is Spanish for gold, is a gold and Bitcoin exchange, which offers instant swaps between hard money to over 31,000 customers from more than 95 countries. Vaultoro has offered Swiss privacy and security since 2015. Furthermore, the gold you purchase is your legal property, secured in your name, so even if something happens to Vaultoro, even liquidators could not touch your gold. If you want to become the custodian of your own gold bars, you can request to have them delivered to you or simply trade them back to Bitcoin on the dip. Register for free in only 30 seconds and start trading only with hard money. Please keep in mind that all trading involves risks. This is not financial advice, and you are responsible for your own decisions. When you are using Wasabi Wallet, your internet connection gets routed through the Tor network by default. This means that you get better privacy while using Bitcoin. Download it today at wasabiwallet.io. You know, what I find very strange is that government always finds a way to reinvent itself and find this, what should I call it, like a rent-seeking tendency to always get involved and convince the largest amount of people that it's necessary. For example, in your short story about self-driving cars that are autonomous and basically operate and produce profits and eventually acquire a different one, I can imagine how our government is gonna get concerned and be like, oh, but how can we make sure that these are whatever abbreviation compliant? So we're gonna need somebody who's gonna look at every car. Plus, we need to make sure that they respect the rules on the road, and we're gonna have this driving code. And even if they're autonomous, there might be software issues and glitches, and we need someone who is like, they're gonna call it an objective authority or something, like a governmental oracle, which guarantees that the standards get respected. And this, the bigger it gets, so let's say that in the beginning it has the best of intentions and everyone can agree that it's good, but it's gonna grow outside of its scope and get excessively corrupt to the point where it doesn't really make sense anymore and nobody even knows why it exists outside of just seeking rent all the time. So that's something that I have no idea how it can get fixed, because people are easy to convince that something is necessary and they should give away some of their freedom or some of their autonomy or some of their ownership in favor of someone who promises some safety in return.
Yeah, absolutely. There was you know, when you have a driver's license, right? Well, in actual fact, a driver is someone that drives other people. And you needed a driver's license when you took your horse and cart out and you offered rides for other people. So you needed a driver's license. I'm a driver for people. And and there was someone, I can't remember in which country, but someone that just didn't want to get a driver's license because he said, I'm not a driver. I'm a self-sovereign person and I have the ability to navigate this vehicle by myself. I'm not driving anyone, so I don't need a driver's license. And the law is there that I don't know. And I think he somehow won that law, won that case where the government was like, oh, yeah, I don't know. I can't remember if I'm just spreading misinformation here, but the definite true part of it is that driver's licenses came from people when you were at the job of a driver. But like you said, the government then turned around and started adding, everybody that drives now a car, even for themselves, needs this license, and we need to check them and we need to prod them and poke them and take photos of them and make sure that they have paid their dues to be able to have the ability to drive themselves about.
Yeah, I think I'm in favor of taking driving classes because lots of disasters get prevented, and
Yeah.
learning how to drive before you even get on the road. But at the same time, I don't think it's ideal that you have this central authority which supervises everything.
No, you could very easily, and this goes back to voluntarism, you could very easily take that out of the state hand because, of course, I want people that have driven and done tests and everything else. But it could quite easily come to say that insurance companies just won't insure you if you haven't done some driving tests. And so the free market is very, very efficient at doing certain things that everybody wants. Everybody wants that you, when other people are on the road, because the only thing stopping you, it's weird, the only thing stopping you from dying is a weirdly painted white line, and you trust every crazy mofo on the road, whether they're like on drugs or alcohol, whatever, that they're not just going to cross that little painted white line and smash head on into you. So, it's a weird world we live in, that we can trust just some paint on a road. But we do, because we hope that they've done some lessons. But definitely, an insurance company could say, we won't insure you unless you have done lessons.
Yeah, now that I think about it, it's kind of insane that we followed this white line all the time and we set our behavior according to it. Like when you're not allowed to surpass another vehicle, there is a continuous one. And no, when you're not allowed, it's continuous. Like it's a straight line. And when you're allowed, it's discontinuous.
Yeah, right. And you trust everybody. You don't know them. They're crazy. They're messed up. They're old. They can't see. You don't even know. Can they hear anything? You just trust this white line that every single car is going to cross that. But nevertheless, we're sort of going down the rabbit hole here of certain functions that I think a state they don't need to have anymore. And insurance is because the biggest complaint that I would get is, you're just going to have criminals running the street. You're going to have criminals, or you're going to have a power vacuum, and basically you're always going to end up with a government. And this is a one that just is actually preyed upon by the state, is that if you don't have us, you'll have the worst of the worst. You'll have full-on anarchy, and you'll have people throwing Molotov cocktails, and you'll have like people with buttless chaps and oil wars, and out of Mad Max. I don't know, it's my weird reference there, but actually, most people, and the media definitely don't want you to think like this, but most people are quite good people. Most people give to charity. Most people want schools because they don't want uneducated kids running around robbing their neighborhoods. Most people want hospitals. Most people want all of these good things. So they're like, well, without a government, how do you pay for all these things? Well, it's an interesting question, because if you'd say, okay, so you're saying that more than 51% of people would want these things, then why do we need a gun to be pointed at everyone to have these things? Why do we need a middleman? Let's just cut out the middleman, because most people want these things. So let's say, okay, if you want, let's go to the extreme, national security. Everybody could sign up to a defense agency, and that defense agency promises to defend your area from aggressors, and for that, maybe all the restaurants around you say, hey, you get a 5% discount if you also are subscribed to the protection agency, because you're helping out the masses. So this is just one example. I thought maybe that's not the right one, but there are definite interesting ways to get around having the state do things like national security. Of course, that also goes to hospitals. But hospitals and things would be based on insurance, because insurance basically does the form of what a state does. If you think about what the function of insurance does, insurance pools the money of many for the unfortunate few. That's basically what they do. And they are very, very good at pricing risk. So insurance companies would be able to offer things like hospitals and things, because you would have that. And if you had competing insurance companies, you could also drive down the price, because hospitals would find cheaper ways of treating people, because there's no sort of state to force things, and weird monopolies between all these doctors' unions getting together and saying, well, you can't possibly have a nurse taking a swab of a tongue and putting it on an agar plate. No, you have to study at least 16 years to do that. So, driving up the price of doctors because they need to do everything. You wouldn't have a state to be able to enforce nonsense like that. But you could definitely have insurance companies to say, well, if you get sick, you insure. And a lot of doctors also get into the practice of being a doctor because they want to help people, believe it or not. And so, it was like this in the 50s and the 60s, that doctors would commonly do charity work 1 day a week for people that were unfortunate enough not to afford certain medical expenses. But I think charities would also be a large part of a voluntary society, as people would fill the void of government assistance.
Oh yeah, I very much agree. And I think about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I read a biography of Charles Darwin, and he had a few family members who were doctors. Actually, his father was a biologist of sorts, and he learned from him. And he also had, I think, an uncle or a cousin who was a physician. And it was described in his letters that basically at the time, if you were going to medical school, you were pushed, it was part of the curricula to do some sort of voluntary work for the poor, to help them, to consult them, to take care of their needs. This was part of the moral duty of becoming a doctor.
Yeah.
In the beginning, at least, all med students had to go and help the poor at the church. They were gathering at the church and they would consult them. They would see if they're right, try to treat them, do their best. And that was part of becoming a doctor, helping the least fortunate.
Amazing. Yeah. And a lot of the time, the main argument against this is like, oh no, everyone, is bad. But if I think about everyone that I know, I don't think I know one person that has never given to a charity. I don't think one person. Imagine if they had a whole lot more money because they got to keep 100% of the earnings that they made, rather than giving 50 to 60 to 70% in some cases through all the taxes on top of taxes to the state. You would have a lot more to give to certain aspects of society that you believe would make it a safer place and a nicer place to live.
I very much agree with this, and if there is something at which governments are very good, then it's making you believe that they have been around forever and that their history is not very recent. Because if you look at history, nation states that we have today were formed during the 1787 or 1789 revolutions, in the case of United States and France. And then you had the 1848 revolutions in Europe, which created all of these nationalist ideas that laid the foundations of the modern nation states. And before that, you only had city-states, you had medieval states, you had this system of feudalism, which was more of a decentralization of what the Roman Empire used to be. So it's interesting how this culture of statism has evolved through time. And I think sometime in the 20th century, it reached its peak with full trust in the state that it's gonna solve all of your problems. We had two experiments, one with fascism, one with communism. Both of them ended very badly. I think communism lasted a lot longer, and not only that, it's still considered to be hip in university campuses today, and you still have students who try to figure out why it failed and how they can make it work, which I think is atrocious. Instead of learning about why it failed and trying to fix the existing system or doing something more productive like inventing something that wasn't tried before, they take something flawed which doesn't take into consideration human nature and basically pushes ideas and ideologies that should precede your existence as opposed to adapting to your existing nature. And I'm referring to communism here because it just starts from some assumptions which are wrongful and are not going to scale, at least not in the form that they were described in the books. So that's how it usually is. And I don't know, it's like nobody really wants you to think outside of what already has been tested and what exists. And it makes sense, if you are head of state and you lead a government, you want everyone to be loyal to the kind of political establishment that you're leading. But I don't think there's much progress to be made if we don't really think outside the box and if we don't try something. And let me tell you that I remember like a news... it was a story from a few years ago in 2016 or something with an old man who used to be like some sort of craftsman. And he was walking in the park every day, and he noticed that the bridge in the park was broken, and he decided to take his hammer and his tools and fix it. And he did it for like $20. And the local government was not in favor of it, and they were not happy about the situation. And it took them like $50,000 or something to fix it. And they said they fixed it, quote unquote, but all they did was to bring some sort of team of quote unquote experts to verify it, to make sure that it respects the public health standards and blah, blah, blah. So basically, they just needed some sort of rent seekers that are encouraged by the state to exist to make sure that the old man's work was right and did the right job. And, it was just someone who said, out of my free time and the tools that I have and the energy that I have, I'm gonna fix this so that everyone can enjoy it. It's as voluntarist as can be.
That's amazing. I love that story. Great. Yeah, I mean, the thing is with communism is, or any sort of bigger government, is that it's very, very enticing. So they, especially out of universities, it's always government, bigger government, very left-leaning. And now we're starting to hear the murmurs of like universal basic income. That's the new fantastic thing. And no, it's not socialism or communism at all. Don't worry about it. It's great. And of course it's enticing. It's free money. I mean, who's not going to want that? You'd have to be an idiot, or you're going to have to be rich. And it's only the rich assholes that don't want that.
Oh, they actually do. So nowadays you have Elon Musk and I think also Jack Dorsey.
Right.
They are proponents of UBI.
Yeah, and it's very, very difficult to people that are not versed in thinking about this stuff, about monetary theory, that don't understand why it's not a good idea. And it can... and I mean, I can just say in one quick step why that's not a good idea, is because as soon as you become, that you have a large nanny state that is feeding you, that is literally, it's not direct food, they're giving you money, you go out there and buy that food with it, but effectively you're getting fed by them, is that if they don't like you, they just cut you off. or if someone threatens the state, or if it turns bad, all those people will stand up and protect the nanny that's been looking after them. They'll put on uniforms very, very quickly. And so you instantly have a large government, a large, effectively could be very vicious state apparatus that have absolute control over whether you eat or don't eat. And this is very dangerous. Where I think there might be a solution is if a blockchain was to somehow issue currency every 10 blocks or whatever, I don't know, 10 minutes or whatever it is. And everybody somehow gets a part of that, like the whole of society somehow gets a part of that. But the problem there is you have Sybil attack issues and all sorts of stuff. So it's a hard nut to crack. But in that case, you wouldn't have a government that is issuing the money for you to eat. So it's a different case. The hard part of that is so much would be issued every 10 minutes that you would also need the demand on the other side to buy that currency. And if everyone's getting it free, everyone, then maybe you don't have the demand on the other side. So, there's some modeling that has to be done on that. But the main problem with that approach of a blockchain issuing it rather than a state is the Sybil attack, which is the attack where you can pretend to be multiple people at once.
I've also heard utopian ideas such as, what if everyone who was born had this amount of money credited to their existence so that they could use that money to get educated, to eat, to start their lives until they actually start making a living and earn money. And it sounds really good, right? Like everyone getting born into the world is going to receive the same amount of money and they can handle themselves. And not only that, this is a bit naive and supposes that there's gonna be no inflation, so this can only be done with hard money. But let's say you can do that. It's also very stupid, because what's your incentive to actually act in a rational way when you can game the system by spending all of your money, and then you're gonna be like, yeah, I spent it all, so are you gonna let me die? And that's an interesting dilemma that happens there, because you get everything for free and nobody believes that you should be working for that kind of money or that you should make any kind of effort. So the whole of society is gonna bail you out, or what?
And you'd have to be foolish to think that there aren't going to be children farmers out there that just farm having more and more kids, because each one of those kids is a money bag, and then you can steal from the kids that don't actually know how to function yet. I mean, it's just a terrible idea. I don't even know where to start with that one.
Yeah, there are so many ways to attack the system, and it's a miracle that the one that we have today is working, and somehow the people who came before us agreed that this would work. But I think at the same time that it had very rational grounds, and it relies on centuries of merchant trading and bartering and all of that kind of stuff. I feel like my generation, and by my generation I mean I was born in the early 90s, so I'll be 30 next year. But we are the first ones to really see this disconnectedness between production and the end product. Not that you haven't seen it, but at least in my country, we haven't really gotten educated to see, for example, where the milk comes from. And it's only getting worse. Like, I'm pretty sure that one generation from now, we will also have children who think that chocolate milk comes from brown cows or something.
Yeah, the purple ones. Purple cows.
Purple.
The Milka ones.
Yeah, Milka.
It's crazy. It's that's a whole different bottle to a can of worms, I guess. Bottle of worms. But I just want to bring it back to ANCAP. or voluntarism. One thing that I constantly get also is the objection about law. How would courts work in a society or how could they work? And this is also a really, really interesting dilemma, because what is law? Law is a certain rule or a ruling that a society has said is not good or bad. And if we take it back to the first principles that we were talking before about don't hit, don't steal, and that you have self-sovereignty, that you have ownership of yourself, then you would have to think about, okay, well, in that case, we don't have a central government having the courts to create laws. Well, how would that possibly work? And I do feel that there is an answer lying in the fact that there is always conflict. And conflict is normally resolved through a court. But believe it or not, we already have a mechanism where we deal with this outside of courts. And most disputes, especially international disputes, are actually solved using dispute resolution companies. And because if you try to resolve a dispute, an international dispute, through the court systems, you'll be in court for 10, 20 years. It's so inefficient. It's unbelievable. So most companies decide that are international will usually, when they form some sort of a business relationship, will more often than not, if it's a larger deal, have predetermined dispute resolution companies that they hire to determine the outcome of a dispute. And so if a dispute does arise between two parties, dispute resolution companies, which would be very similar, or if not the same companies as insurance companies, maybe they have an arm which are dispute resolution. So let's say you and I get you to fix my bathtub, and you come and we sign an agreement that we use readjust for a company that arbitrates disputes, and we say, okay, well, if anything goes wrong in our little business dealing here, where you fix my bathtub for $100, then we'll go to Red Justice. And if we find that if you don't like Red Justice, we'll go to a second tier of Blue Justice, the other company, and they'll be the final word. And we'll just we agree with that. Okay, cool, yeah, all right. Fix my bathtub. Anyway, a week goes by, and I'm having a bath, and it's still leaking everywhere, and I'm like, damn it, Vlad, you didn't fix it properly. I'm not going to pay you. And of course, you then open a dispute with the dispute resolution company, and you say, hey, this gentleman here, I fixed his bathtub. Here's all my proof that I did, and I feel that he actually ruined it after I fixed it, or whatever else. And I go with all my proof, and I take it to Red Justice, and the Red Justice then would favor one or the other, and for that would get a slight payment. I mean, these slight payments are exactly what you do right now, except you do it through force, through taxation. The only difference is you would voluntarily pay that in the coming together of a certain contract. And you could have these would be definitely templated contracts, and there wouldn't be any mucking around, and you could almost have it like a website where when you click the I accept terms and conditions that you use, Red Justice or Blue Justice or Pink or whatever justice companies there are, dispute resolution companies. And if you didn't like the outcome, it would then escalate to the blue. The interesting thing here, Vlad, is that a private dispute resolution company has has an orders of magnitude more incentive to not be corrupt. Because if they're found to be corrupt, they will never be used again by anyone. Because if you're before the fact choosing a dispute resolution company to arbitrate if things go south, then you're going to want to choose the least corrupt. Whereas a state court, they don't care. They don't care if they're corrupt. It doesn't really matter because they don't have to compete with anybody. They don't have to compete with anybody. They just, they just get paid behind a counter or whatever by some company, and you just hit your hammer on this side instead of that side, and call it a day. So, a private court system that would have to compete in a free market is far less likely to be corrupt than a single monopoly on the outcome of disputes.
Hey, what's your plan for the next Bitcoin top? Unless you need the money to purchase something, you probably should not touch infinitely inflationary fiat. Check out Vaultoro and figure out to which extent hard money like gold and silver can help you preserve your purchasing power. You will be able to get back into Bitcoin as soon as the price hits a new bottom, and you will not be subjected to the arbitrary inflation-driven volatility of fiat or fiat-backed coins. Obviously, this is not financial advice, and you should understand that all trading involves risks. Wasabi Wallet connects to your full Bitcoin node, and if you're not running one, it downloads block filters anonymously via Tor. In either case, you're getting excellent privacy. Download the software today at wasabiwallet.io. Yeah, this is mostly about eliminating the single point of failure. And you can have a system which has many more backups and many more alternatives. In case you're not happy with the outcome, you can appeal to a different private court.
Yeah. And it's the same with policing. I mean, if you would subscribe to a protection agency, and that protection agency would do a pretty good job, I'm telling you, would do a better job than the police system at protecting you. In fact, if you ask any very wealthy individual if they use the police or if they use private protection, I'm pretty much sure they're all going to say private protection. I wonder why. It's because they're incentivized to actually protect you. Whereas the police are incentivized to protect, not really their job. And, they just could really, there's a whole gamut of checks and balances that need to be built into a single monopoly on force. Whereas if let's say you're a teenager and some policeman from, broadband justice department, whatever, private policing comes and just starts harassing you and starts beating you up and harassing all your mates in the car and asking for whatever, just being a dick. Are you ever going to use that company as a protection agency? You're pretty much going to boycott them for life, right? So first of all, you're going to have a lot more respectful police officers because they want to get your business in the future, and it's the balance between being fair and being wanting to not lose business, because you'd also want a fair policeman that is ready to protect you without going overboard and beating the crap out of someone or killing them like George Floyd. What the hell? I'm pretty sure if that was a private agency, no black person in America would ever use that company ever again, because they'd just be like, what? No, not gonna do that. And effectively, that's what they tried to do with the defund the police thing and all this nonsense. Was that they tried to say, well, geez, I wish we had some choice in the market of policing, but they don't. It's a monopoly.
Yeah, but you know what the issue is sometimes? You need to have the same point of reference. Like, for example, with courts is simple because you can agree to a certain set of rules. So let's say that instead of having a national law or constitution of sorts, with private courts you have private sets of laws and you have private ways of applying the same laws with different kinds of punishments and stuff like that. Let's say that that's the case. But in the case of police, you don't have the same kind of identical system of values. And you can have different, for example, different police agencies that are private are going to have different ways of defining intervention and violence and all of their procedures. And I suppose that somebody who just likes to create chaos can easily turn them one against the other. And basically, you can have individuals who are defended by two different police agencies, and you can make them fight for no reasons other than just gaming the rules or exploiting the fact that you're paying them. So
yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's very, very expensive to have a war. It's almost like if a private company had to do it, it just won't happen because it's super expensive, and it's kind of useless. So a policing agency isn't just going to go to war with another agency, because it's just far too expensive. It doesn't make any sense. They'd rather sit down at a table and figure it out. Like, this is the thing. A lot of people, especially on the left, they haven't. You know, I hate this whole left-right thing because I just think it's nonsense. But I'm going to say it anyway. Once you're an entrepreneur and you've tried to run your own business, you start to be a little bit more on the side of personal responsibility and personal rights rather than collective rights, because you start to see the injustice of that. But if you are to, let's say, let's just quickly go through the policing thing. If I'm you've lad, you're walking along and you get robbed on the street, and someone pulls a gun and robs you and runs off, and you would ring your protection agency, and you would say, "Hey, Red Justice, can you please, sort me out here? Find the person that robbed me for my $2,000 I have in my pocket." And they would come along. They would basically give you, the insurance company would give you the $2,000, and they would say, "Okay, you're now out of this. We've remunerated you your $2,000 because it's also an insurance, and now we're going to try and find that $2,000 because it's now in our court to try to get that money back, right? Because we've just paid someone that money." So we start snooping around, and we find that I was there at that time and at that place, and that I was most probably the guy that robbed you, let's say. And I would, of course, the first thing I do is ring my dispute resolution company and say, "Hey, who are these people? I wasn't here, whatever." And they would then say, "Look, you have to hand over Josh, your company, because we have really good evidence that he was there and robbed our client." And my dispute resolution company says, "No, we're not going to hand him over because we don't believe that you did anything." So they will get together, and so one thing could happen. They could shoot it out. They could just duel it out. They could just bust out their guns and start attacking. But, are they really, for that $2,000? I don't know. Like, are they really gonna shoot it out? Most probably they would have a dispute resolution company that they would, both subscribe to. And they would take this thing to a private court who would see both of our cases and make a ruling on it. Now, if we dueled it out, if we started shooting each other, then that's pretty bad look. I mean, no one's going to want to subscribe to a company that just goes out killing people and whatever and whatnot, right? So maybe they wouldn't do that. I think they would take up the dispute resolution company. They would file a ruling, and hey presto, they rule to the fact that I wasn't there and you got the wrong guy, and well, that's it. They continue their sleuthing and try to find the real person, or they say, yep, you're right, we believe that that Joshua did indeed rob Vlad at that point in time, and my protection agency would relinquish protection of me and hand me over, in which then I would do some time or I would be told to either pay $2,000 back over time or more, maybe more, and that any job that I have to do that. Otherwise, it escalates to some sort of private prison or whatever. But again, this can sound totally scary. But if I was to tell you right now that, if you robbed someone, some people in blue would come that I don't know and just take me to a prison and lock me up, it also sounds scary. It's just that this is new, and people straight away think, this is super sketchy. Because also, if you think about every single movie, Vlad, it's always private evil people. Like, if you think of every single James Bond villain is some mega maniacal, freak rich person that wants to kill the whole world, whatever. It's never a government. The government's always the good guy. So we're sort of programmed to think that, oh God, no, like a private prison, that's in a competing system is way worse than a prison system that's run by a government.
Yeah, and also, I think an interesting distinction that we need to always make when we define anything in regards to anarchy is that anarchy doesn't mean the absence of rules. It just relates to the absence of rulers, which is a completely different concept. It's just about that all of us want to be equal to each other. We don't want to have kings, we don't want to have presidents, we don't want to have prime ministers or any kind of other types of, what should I call them, different social classes. Yeah. We want to be able to govern ourselves and just live in societies according to the best of our abilities and contribute and create value according to our best knowledge.
Yeah. And, for all those listening and saying, oh, wow, Josh is a psychopath. Jesus, what does he want? I'm not saying that this is the way it should work. I'm just thinking about the ways it might work without a state. How would life work? How could a bunch of people, a society, function without a central authority that has the initiation of the use of force and the initiation and the ability to pen law and punish people within a geographical region? How can we run a society without that? Is there a possibility of doing so? And these are really interesting ideas. I mean, it's like living in a sci-fi novel, but it's interesting to think about.
It's also interesting to think about all of these sci-fi cyberpunk novels where there's always the evil corporation that took over the state, and it's always like a moralizing story about why states are still better than corporations. And if you read anything by William Gibson, who, by the way, is a big time. I'm not sure if I should call him a leftist, but he fits into that description. And I think he's a big supporter of Joe Biden and just likes the idea of a bigger government, which is a bit ironic. Like, that guy was able to conceive with his mind such beautiful universes that function in a way that's more or less autonomous and without the power of the government, yet he ended up becoming what, I don't know. It's mind-blowing sometimes. Also in the case of Taleb and...
I mean, what usually happens by the time you're a little bit older, you've gone through, and if you're living in the West, you've gone through multiple surgeries and things. And if you're living in a system that has a statist healthcare system, like the UK, I think William Gibson's UK, right? Then you praise those people as lifesavers, and you know, obviously, but the fact of the matter is, there could also be an opposite, a different way of having the same outcome that wouldn't rely on a super state above you that is listening and spying on everything and about to build a massive giant network of genetic passports and status of health if you're allowed to travel, depending on how many T cells you have in your system of some sort. We're heading towards a total nightmare of a state, and where things like COVID have really pushed the level of statism and this sort of unbridled love of more control and handing over power to state apparatuses, that we're heading into extremely dangerous territory. And that's why I somehow love to think about how a state would work without any government at all. Like if I was to say to a doctor, hey, there's a cancer there, can you take it out? And they say, oh, well, we'll take 95% of it out and we'll just leave 5% there. You say, what? No, just take the whole lot out. What are you doing? So that's why I like to think about, in terms of state, how can we take all of it out just to be a counterweight to the massive amount of statism and obsession with giving more and more power to a small elite group.
I also find it interesting that in the Bitcoin space, I've discovered lots of people who describe themselves as anti-democracy, but at the same time, they also seem to favor monarchies because they start from the assumption that a monarch works in the best interest and rules according to the best interest of his people. But that's not really true. Like, we have such a long story with power abuses and this whole idea of hereditary passing of your throne is just crazy. Like, you have no idea if that person is gonna be mentally sane, but you're gonna pass him the throne and he's gonna rule over a large amount of people, even if he had the best of education, or she, because we've also had queens. Even if they had the best of education and they were raised into this aristocratic environment where they have learned how to perfect their skills and just become all-around educated people. You can even see the example of the North Korea dictator. And a lot of, Western journalists and observers were hoping that since he was schooled in Switzerland and he went to all of these Western schools when he was young, he would become a more, how should I put it, a nicer ruler. He would not torture his people like his father did and like his grandfather did, but he turned out just the same.
Yeah.
And it's just terrible, this idea that no matter what, you're gonna have a dynasty or some sort of family which always stays in power. To some people, it's simple because you know you don't have to worry about anything. You just go on with your daily life and don't think too much about politics. But for all of its flaws, I like to think that if I were born into any other system other than a free democracy, I would have been in prison today. You know, I've said so much crazy stuff, and I very much enjoy having the freedom of speech and even the freedom to speak against the system
Yeah.
in which I live. A
But
lot of
is
people
that
don't seem to appreciate it.
But is that to do with democracy per se, or is that to do with a cultural environment of people being respectful of, unpopular opinions? Because just the fact that you get to vote for someone, is that really the reason why you can say obnoxious things online? I mean, maybe it is, because maybe that is the mechanism where you slowly weed in more and more progressive ideas into society by having people voted out by the next generation who believe something better, and maybe that is maybe it is the voting mechanism. But who's to say that? I definitely wouldn't want to live in a dictatorship. That's for sure. And I'm not saying that democracy is the worst possible thing in the world either. I like you, I absolutely would be put in prison if some of the shit that I say. But in some countries, But all I'm saying is, with these philosophies, is that we can aim to have a better system. I mean, the numbers, if you look at democide, which is governments killing their own people, it's orders of magnitude, like in the way higher. Like it doesn't even, you can't, if you put it on a chart compared to private murders, you can't even see. It's like the private murders are less than a pixel in terms of what pop up in the bar graph, and the amount of democide in the 20th century is so silly high. So you've got to, when you see those sort of statistics, you got to say, wow, government institutions are dangerous, an extremely dangerous institution. Because you have like groupthink and you have narcissists that bubble to the top, and you have power hungry freaks and ideals and whatever else, and then you have yes men that just surround them. And in terms of a dictatorship or a monarchy, they just get surrounded by yes men all the time, and they end up going crazy because everyone says yes to everything they say. They start getting delusions of grandeur, and they just start running amok. But I guess what I'm saying is, of course, I like the society I live in. I like the fact that we have these freedoms, but I like thinking of these thoughts because I like to head in a direction where I feel is more freedom and not less, and where I feel is more inspiration and more exploration and less violence, rather than fixing complex social issues with the hammer of violence and saying just make a law, which is in fact just adding violence. Rather than that, we say, how can we fix complex social issues without violence?
Yeah, so let me get back a bit to democracy and just mention It's two advantages, because you have asked the question, wouldn't a more authoritarian regime be able to defend freedom of speech? I like to think that the main feature of democracy is not that you can vote anyone into office, but that you can vote people out of office. The fact that you can change your rulers. And at the same time, another feature which tends to come packaged with well-functioning democracies is this separation of powers. So if you upset one power that's in charge of something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to start a plot against you. You can still be safe while insulting the president of the republic if, the president of the republic is not also the judiciary. So the fact that there is this minimalistic but still present separation of powers still grants you some sort of freedom. And I don't really remember what you said last, because that was what I was going to expand on next.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky, because I often get that, well, move to Somalia then, something like that. And it's not that I want to live in an anarchy where people have been forced into that because of a whole bunch of warlords and nonsense. When I talk about an anarcho-capitalistic society, I talk about a post-enlightened evolution into that society, and not one thrown into that through chaos of war. Of course, that's not where I'm coming from. But if you look at, even statistically in Somalia, some of the statistics, you see that the literacy rates are going up. Less war is happening now than before, when there was a state. Yeah, you have piracy, but a lot of the piracy is actually states declaring piracy against fishermen that are protecting their waters. Somalian fishermen that are just protecting their fishing regions, because large French boats, believe it or not, are just going over there and dumping toxic waste into the oceans. And some of these Somalian pirates, so-called pirates, or I would say fishermen, go there and shoot up the boats and say, get the hell out of here. These are our fishing waters. We need this as our industry. And then the French come along and say, right, we need protection from all these nasty pirates. And of course, there are nasty pirates that also come and take people hostage and all that. There is that. But more often than not, these are people protecting the fishing ability, and protecting the waters from overfishing from large countries that just go in there with trawlers and stuff. And the way to just basically smear them is to call them pirates, and then get huge warships that from the US and basically destroy these small fishermen. But I just sort of a bit of a side angle there about away from democracy. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, that's fine. I think the new Somalia is El Salvador, the first country in the world to declare Bitcoin as legal tender. And I don't think it's a very good idea, but I've been telling people, if you're so excited about it, why don't you move there? And if the US gets involved and tries to bring back democracy or something, I just did, the air quote unquote gesture. If that happens, why don't you stay there all throughout the process, so you understand what's going on and what kind of world we actually live in, and why it's a bad idea to have top-down adoption of Bitcoin. We're supposed to be educating others and leveraging our sovereignty within the nation states that maybe are not functional today, but we can improve. But to bring adoption from the smallest person, to explain to them why this matters, to make them responsible with their money, to explain them the principles of sound money and all of that monetary theory that we can, I suppose, minimize and just distill it into small bits that can be easily digested. But instead of that, we cheer when we get corporations or heads of state praising Bitcoin and accept it, which I think is backwards. We should not get to that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, I'm obviously way more of a fan of going into El Salvador and teaching all these people to use Lightning wallets and how to secure their savings and with Bitcoin and whatever else, rather than going in there and saying to the state, oh, now force everyone to use Bitcoin. And it just doesn't sound like a good idea, especially if it's a corrupt state like El Salvador.
It also puts us in a very gray area. Like, are we going to start praising dictators because they accepted Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the early Bitcoiners had a very were a lot more philosophically driven. Bring it back to this show. Whereas nowadays, over the time, you got a variant of people in. You had, in the early days, there was a mixture of two types of people. People that just are obsessed with mathematics and technology and encryption, and then the philosophical cypherpunks who wanted to have a free money, asset-based money of rare numbers on the internet. And now, over the course of the last 12 years, 13 years, whatever it is, 2021, now 12, it's like we're having like bankers coming in, having all these like massive amounts of speculators, moon boys and girls. You have just a total spectrum of everybody, and the vast majority of them just want to get rich quick. And with those sorts of attitudes, I would not be surprised if, they would be praising a dictatorship because they start to accept Bitcoin or whatever. And, you can see this in like Elon Musk, for instance. There was such praise of Elon, such, Elon, our God, our king, this sort of massive...
The Mars Emperor.
Yeah, the Mars Emperor, and wow, what a genius, and he's now accepting Bitcoin, and Bitcoin price is going higher, and everyone's chanting, yay. As soon as he tweets something negative about it, everyone hates him. Everyone's anti him. Hey, what the hell? What the hell, man? Like, gone are the days where, I remember back in the day, Peter Todd used to be the voice of reason in Bitcoin. And everyone used to hate him as well because he would say, hey guys, there's a flaw in XYZ, and he wouldn't care about saying it. And, not that I like or dislike Elon Musk here, and I'm definitely not equating those two as being similar, Peter Todd and him. But what I'm saying is, as a community, more how we're reacting to someone pointing negatives out or falsities, even like I would say Elon's criticisms are false. But being so fickle as a community as to praise someone when they're pushing the price up, but if they say something wrong, then we just, totally get on them, is ridiculous. And it's sad, but it shows that I definitely think the people that are now in this game would definitely praise a dictator coming out and saying he's going to force all his people to use Bitcoin.
I mean, he never said he's gonna force them, but, he's gonna make it a legal tender alongside the US dollar, which is also interesting because that's going to upset Uncle Sam, but that's a whole different kind of conversation.
Yeah. Look, I mean, dictators are going to dictate. Leaders are going to try to lead. And if they take Bitcoin, hey, who am I to stop them? It just is what it is. And Bitcoin doesn't care. You know, it's the honey badger, or as I like to call it, the fainting goat of money, because it'll just tip over to some shitty news and then it'll just get right back up again and keep going. It's not... it doesn't care who accepts it as quote unquote legal tender. You know, in my mind, anything. I mean, the fact of the matter is, Bitcoin is money, so it doesn't matter if it's legal or not, because people will use it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And by the way, you have mentioned that there is this wave of moon boys and moon girls. Do you know what they call moon girls on Twitter?
No.
UTX hoes.
Damn, that's harsh.
It is.
But what
I
if
was
they're
also
using?
surprised, like,
I don't know if it works for Ethereum, because Ethereum doesn't use UTXO.
no, but I don't think anyone really wants Ethereum.
Yeah.
It's not a store of value. It's not something that people are very much concerned about storing. Like, I've spoken to people from Vaultoro, so they make these metal plates, and they told me that they have never seen anyone from the Ethereum community being so concerned about using paper to write down the seed words, so that they buy, you know, a metal plate to put it on something that's sturdy and can withstand fire and floods and whatever, some physical damage. They just don't care much, and they tend to trust centralized entities a lot more. And I don't know, that community is just something else. It's not as ideologically driven, or it's driven by some other form of ideology, which also happens to praise. I think Vitalik at some point proposed what he called social recovery, which means that if you lose your access to funds, you can delegate part of the access to like 3 or 5 parts, and they have to put together. It's sort of like a multi-sig, but it functions in a more basic way.
All right.
And he considers that to be safe, and a lot of people in the community think that it's safe. Whereas if you proposed something like that in Bitcoin, so that you delegate to your family access to your private keys, I mean, a lot of people would be against that. They would say, you know, what's the point? It's supposed to
But
be
you
sovereign
can do
money.
that.
I don't. What did you say that you can?
Yeah, you can do that in Bitcoin. You can
With
set
a
up
multi-sig, yeah. Or with Shamir secret sharing.
Yeah. So it's not, I mean, I don't see anyone stopping you doing that. But I mean, there's all sorts of weird schemes and schematics. Like the EOS, for instance, has some sort of time lock thing that has like double. But at the end of the day, I think Ethereum, Bitcoin doesn't allow certain things that Ethereum does. And that's the only reason why I think Ethereum will succeed in its capacity. I don't think it's one or the other. I don't think it's a winner takes all. I think it's a constant competition. But I feel that Bitcoin has pretty much won that competition in terms of store of value, because it was first, and it doesn't need any real major changes. People will buy it. You know, a store of value doesn't need thousands of transactions a second, and if you do have the Lightning Network, and it's getting better by the day. Like some of the stuff that is available, you know, on LM Bits, even though it's still very buggy, it's phenomenal what we can do straight out of the box. And there's lots of open source projects building really, really cool stuff to make Bitcoin the currency actually usable. But as a store of value, it's already won. But what it hasn't done is, it's some of this more complex stuff, which we're working on at the moment. I'm working on another project, which I think I've told you a little bit about, but it's basically allowing people to lock up units of account of hard assets. There's $10 trillion of gold sitting around in vaults around the world, just gathering dust, just sitting there, and it's unfortunate that people can't borrow against that in a decentralized mechanism and issue themselves some sort of currency. And so I had looked into creating that on Bitcoin, but it's just impossible. There's just no real way you can. You can do it on a side chain or whatever else, but it doesn't have the other parts of the ecosystem. And we'll see what happens with Ethereum. I mean, it really doesn't look like it's scaling very well. That's for sure. It is a huge worry because unlike Bitcoin, that the base chain doesn't necessarily need to scale to massively, because what needs to happen is that Lightning needs to get more network effect. That definitely needs to happen as a currency. But as a store of value that has an easier, more liquid mechanism than gold, and has the function, has the better part of it where you don't need to hold in a physical place with people with guns and storage and weight and armored cars and all that stuff that comes with gold, insurance. I mean, it's not that expensive, $15 to, and on a really heavy day you might be looking at like $50. But something like Ethereum absolutely needs to scale, because it's not about storing value. It's about creating a system that allows you to run complex decentralized contracts and or computer programs, as I like to call them. I don't know why they started being called contracts. I guess it's because 51% of the network has to agree on the output. But Ethereum definitely needs to scale, and if it doesn't, it'll die. Whereas Bitcoin, it won't.
I remember that at some point in 2019, you launched the VGold tokens on the RGB layer 3 of Bitcoin, which was built on top of the Lightning Network. And what went wrong with that one?
Well, we never really launched it because it wasn't really ready, but we were playing around with it. The main thing with tokenizing gold directly is that, and this is why all of the gold tokens that are out there, all of them, in my mind, are scams. Because, and I don't like saying scam, because I believe it's used way too often, and I believe a lot of the so-called scams out there are basically experiments and ideas in the space. And there's also legitimate scams, obviously, like OneCoin or BitConnect and many others. But there was a lot of experiments. But what went wrong there, and why we didn't pursue it, is that when you hold a physical asset, whether it's gold or property, anything really, you have real world expenses to holding that. So you have to pay for gold. In the case of gold, you have to pay for insurance, auditing, big metal doors, people with guns to protect it, or a company, And if you tokenize that, and that person, you could charge that person every time he sends or she sends that token. You could charge a certain amount for the time that he's held it, but it gets very difficult. You start getting lots of UTXO and lots of in and out, and some exchanges, what do they hold? And maybe someone loses their keys. What if they lose their keys? Then you're holding The vaulting facility is holding gold forever and never getting any of that demurrage cost paid. So what these coins that are out there that are saying that it's 1-to-1 peg, 1 gram for 1 token, are a Ponzi scheme in a way, because they have to have new people coming in to pay for anyone that's old that's lost their keys, and they have to pay for those storage fees for. And that goes for the regulated ones like PAX and all the rest of them. I just think they haven't thought it through. They've seen an opportunity. They've jumped on it. They said, here's an ERC20, one of these equals 1 gram in the vault. But the demurrage costs aren't paid. And I don't see how it's possible for that mechanism to pay it. So I feel that we've solved it by using a smart contract where the amount gets locked in the database, and an oracle comes and mirrors that in terms of tokens, but people are never allowed to withdraw the tokens from that smart contract to a wallet. That smart contract is only allowed to be accessed to pay back, and every month it automatically pays the demurrage costs. Every month it just pays. So if I lose access to that smart contract, if I lose access to my keys, it doesn't matter, because it does, because that would suck. I don't have access to my gold anymore. but that smart contract will continue paying the fees forever, and that way it also allows us to enter that gold, that physical asset, into the DeFi space. So this is a project called the Standard.io, and it's we've been working on it for about 8 months, and it is running on Ethereum. I am excited about it. I'm very, very excited about it. It's one of my more passion projects, because I do believe there's a need for hard assets in this world. I'm not totally sold on only Bitcoin. I know most people are, and I totally am not saying that I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know that I'm a technocrat. I understand Bitcoin. I can secure Bitcoin. I have for many years. I love Bitcoin. I love it more than most things in my life. But I am also a realist, and I know that there are parts of India where people wear more gold than most central banks have. Gold is in the DNA of societies, and it's decentralized in its issuance. It's private. It's a bearer-based asset. It's fungible. It's wonderful, and it has its place. And I would like to see it work together in the amazing decentralized finance space, which I find also extremely fascinating, also full of scams, for sure. But there are also some really, really interesting ideas. Where with the Standard, we're taking on ideas that MakerDAO really pioneered. But what I find is there's a few downfalls in MakerDAO. For instance, the voting, and this goes back to our idea, and this is why I go back to my agoristic and voluntaristic roots, is that I just don't like voting. I just think it's a ridiculous form of anything, because there's voter apathy in MakerDAO. There's no one comes along and they just don't vote for the stability fee, for the interest rate. So you don't get the most accurate thing. It still works, it's pegged pretty well over a long time now, so it's pretty amazing. But I have a fascination with these algorithmic stablecoins, but I do think voting isn't the right way to go. So we're looking at using prediction markets rather than voting, where people predict and bet on the best interest rate to peg to the euro and to other fiat currencies, but still back it by gold. So I think there's some really interesting things there, and that's what I'm playing with at the moment.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood like half of what you said because I'm not very well versed with all of the intricacies of the financial system and, the details about the gold market. But I still think that it's interesting, and I hope someday you're gonna find a way to port it to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, I'm want this to be a platform, a protocol. Sorry, that that is blockchain agnostic, really, because I want to unlock the value that's just sitting there. At the end of the day, I want people to say, I save in hard assets and I can borrow against it from myself. So borrow from myself. For instance, I go to I have $1,000 worth of gold, and I say, well, I'm going to lock that gold up and issue myself some currency. A lot of people, it's kind of like a pawn shop. It's a terrible example, but a pawn shop, you take your bike and you say, I need some money, and the pawnbroker will give you, half of the value of the bike as cash, and then you have to just come back and pay that back plus some interest, and you can have your bike back. But you haven't had to sell your bike. You've still got your bike. But imagine that without any intermediary, without a party that's a third party. Instead, you're dealing with a smart contract that's been it's just in the fog, and you have the private key to that, so you can access it with your private key. But it's coded to say you can't unlock the value in this unless you pay back the stablecoin that you generated. And that pegging mechanism to the is where the voting or the sorry, it's getting late. My brain's fading, but where the prediction markets come in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna take a look at that, but I see that the website is not working right now. It's gonna get launched, as it says, there's a countdown. It's gonna get launched in 7 days. Maybe by the time I publish this podcast, it will already have been launched. So as you mentioned, it's thestandard.io.
Yeah.
And it's fitted to the needs of the gold market, right? So that you can essentially borrow amounts of gold and borrow against it.
Yeah, if you hold savings in hard asset custodians like Brinks or on Vaultoro will be the first hard asset custodian to plug itself into the protocols. Then you can lock up, let's say, $1,000 worth of gold and generate 85% of that value. So you build an over-collateralized debt obligation to yourself, and you can generate a euro pegged stablecoin. And the reason why there isn't any real euro stablecoins like Tether is because of the negative interest rates. So no one wants to hold vast amounts of euros because it costs a damn lot and they'll be broke. So in fact, this is a real big problem for Tether and all these stablecoins that are one-to-one pegged with so-and-so called real assets, like physical assets backing them and pegging them. So this is an algorithmic stablecoin where when you generate it, the mechanism is that you have decentral bankers, holding the governance token. Let's just go with the voting. What they do is they vote if the peg goes below the value of the euro, then they will lift interest rates of anyone that's borrowed from themselves slightly. Some of those people will go, oh, this is too much of an interest rate and too much interest to pay. So they'll go on the open markets and buy back those stable coins, which will bring demand and lift the price up to sort of hit the peg. Same if it goes over the top, it becomes worth more than the euro, then they'll lower interest rates. So more people borrow from themselves to go long and flood the market with those stable coins, bringing the supply in and dropping the value. And you mix that with just the the market saying, well, there should be a one-to-one peg. So it's surprisingly, I didn't think initially when MakerDAO brought this mechanism out 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I didn't think it would work as well as it did. I really didn't. I thought I've been waiting for black swan events for a long time, and it just hasn't happened. And even in some of the really high volatile times, it stayed fairly pegged. Yeah, I find it super fascinating, this whole thing of having a stablecoin that's algorithmic rather than and backed by gold. So I love the idea of a private gold standard, and that's pretty much what I'm trying to build is a decentralized private gold standard, and not having to wait for a government to issue a gold standard, but rather just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to issue myself a gold-backed currency that's in a denomination that I understand, like euros. Like most people know how many euros a bottle of vodka costs, but they don't know how many grams of gold a bottle of vodka costs. So by backing a stablecoin that you issue yourself, by borrowing against yourself with gold and also crypto, you can collateralize a debt obligation with crypto, rare assets, crypto and gold in our case. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Okay, it doesn't sound very simple. I hope that at least the interface is more intuitive, but I'm gonna take a look as soon as it's out.
Thanks, man. Yeah. I hope to simplify it. That's a big challenge for sure.
Also, I know that lots of Bitcoiners like to present Bitcoin as this gold killer, even though the early adopters of Bitcoin were big gold bugs. And I'm pretty sure that they still hold gold, and they understand that it's the oldest form of currency that has been consistent throughout history, and is still held in nation-state reserves. And, when we heard news about sanctions, for example, in Russia, we also heard news about Russia buying more gold because they did not want to fall into the dollar system and become victims of all of these sanctions, which basically could present them a situation where they would not have access to US dollars as much. So it's definitely interesting that gold finds ways of reinventing itself, even though Barry Silbert will come out and say it's the shiny rock, you should not touch it.
I mean, it's just still so dumb. It's like, I mean, you have 4K TVs at home, but people still go to the cinema, It's like there is... rare assets are what's interesting. Bitcoin is a fiat killer. It's not a gold killer. Gold has been through every war and every nightmare that the human condition has thrown at that thing called the shiny rock. And it's come out through the other side holding value. Barry needs to have some respect, quite honestly, for this stuff. It's a phenomenon that's very, very rare, if not nowhere else. That if you look at anywhere there's a war or a natural disaster or anything, the economy gets absolutely decimated. The fiat gets absolutely decimated. The credit system, everything. But the gold still holds value. The gold still holds value because it's fungible globally. And so, yeah, maybe it doesn't have value in that area as much as somewhere else because there's always arbitrage opportunities. But globally, there's a value for gold, and it has different mechanisms. It's just what you want to diversify. I mean, you ask someone that invested in Bitcoin, on the day that Coinbase listed on at Bitcoin's highs, you ask them now if Bitcoin's a store of value or not. I mean, it's dropped 40% or something, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not bagging Bitcoin here because I don't really care if it drops 40% because I know in the long run But if you have to sell right now, that's a pretty big drop. I don't know if a store of value is the right term in terms of that. Of course, if you've held it for more than 6 months or 8 months, then you're in the winning, and that's from day dot of holding Bitcoin. So it's definitely a store of value in that case. But if you're unlucky to have just bought in and it's gone down, then you'd be saying, I don't get it. Why is this a store of value? It's not a store of value. And gold, its worst day, it's like a 2% drop or something like that over the last. I think the largest drop has been like 5% or something in the last 30 years or something. So there's nothing like Bitcoin.
Yeah, plus I just took a look and it has a market cap of 12 trillion. So the fact that it has such a large market cap and it's so decentralized in terms of ownership, you have gold owners all across the world. It's very hard to inflate, so there is gold getting mined. But at the same time, the amounts getting added to the total supply are pretty small. And it's also costly to extract. I suppose that's why also Satoshi defined the discovery of new Bitcoins as mining, just because it's a resource-intensive process. And there are reasons why it has value, and then again, if governments use it as a way of storing reserves, this is just proof that this, dead shiny rock has a lot of value, and there are a lot of actors who are going to appreciate it for what it is and for what it has offered throughout history. And of course, the main issue with gold is that it can be easily confiscated and it's hard to move across borders, which I suppose are very legitimate concerns.
Yeah, but at the same time, Bitcoin is also extremely easily stolen in large organizations, and governments are the largest of organizations. So if you have a large organization, who are you going to trust with those keys? How are you going to do that? Like, it's a problem. It's a problem in large corporations too. So usually what they would do is trust then a Coinbase or something like that, in which case that could also be just gun to Brian Armstrong's head, hand over the Bitcoin. So
they usually have multi-sig setups, so it's more complicated. You need to point more guns to more people's heads at the same time.
Yeah,
to sign
I'm sure
transactions.
But I'm pretty sure if the American government said to Coinbase, hand over the coins to El Salvador's Bitcoin, they would do it. Pretty sure.
Yeah, granted that El Salvador is so short-sighted that they store their coins on Coinbase.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying, right, is if they don't, then they have to secure themselves. So who are they going to trust? The head of IT at El Salvador? Is he the guy that's got the keys? Or is it a multi-sig between 5 people? What if 2 of them die in an accident? Oh, geez, now we've got 3 and we don't know who. Does anyone remember how we did this initially? Hang on, someone wrote a book here on what to do if someone lost 2. But that was before the dictator died. What's going on? Like, there's so many ins and outs. So the Bitcoin has this problem. If you make it too complex, which becomes way more, it becomes very good for security. Sometimes becomes too good for security, and then you can't get it out at all. And in the other way, you make it too little, too less security, and you have one corrupt individual or 2 that get together in a dark room and say, hey, why don't we just copy the keys and say, I don't know, the money disappeared. I don't know. And we both head to Switzerland or India and disappear. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always complicated to find the right kind of security.
It's complicated. And gold, On the other hand, for governments, it's actually quite hard to steal because it's so damn heavy. To take vast amount of gold, you can't just rock up with trucks because literally the tires burst if you fill up the truck. Like, it just doesn't work. So the best thing to do is actually to take over the government and then announce that the gold that's in that vault that doesn't move is now your gold. So in that sense, it can be stolen. But yeah, it's I think gold, like in that sense, does make sense for governments to hold as a store of value or as a reserve. The problem is the governments they don't want gold because they can't print it out of nowhere. They don't want Bitcoin because they can't print it out of nowhere. It's very, very unpopular to tax your citizenry for that bridge you so kindly promised in your election. It's very unpopular to tax people more, so you just want to print that money. And if you've got gold, you can't just print it, you have to go and mine it. And so most countries don't hold much gold for that reason.
Yeah, plus there are countries that sold most of their gold reserves, which I think I'm not in a position to judge, but it's pretty short-sighted.
Yeah, they sold most of their gold positions also all-time lows because they're like, oh no, look how cheap, it's just getting cheaper. What are we doing holding this ancient relic? Fools.
Yeah.
Yeah, but such is life, governed by fools. You have to dream about how we can become ruled by less fools, or if ruled at all. And we set up the rules either in code or through game theoretical mechanisms where we don't need a ruling class.
Yeah, and this has been like the dream of pirates. That's what I like to think. You had Sir Francis Drake, and you had all of the pirates of the 17th century and the 18th century who sailed the seas and were trying to bury treasures of gold and were trying to set up their own utopian societies. I think what we see today with Bitcoin is very similar, except that it's not as dangerous. I think this whole space is a lot safer than many other financial experiments that we have had throughout history. And maybe that this is also the reason why it's going to succeed and it has a higher likeliness as opposed to trying to hide away from the government ships and burying your treasures and hiding maps all over the place and living this kind of life.
And dying in storms.
Exactly.
Yeah. And pirates are, the history of piracy is amazing. It's stunning. They're the first democracies. Apart from Greece, but they're the first to end slavery in a sense. They were
they also provided healthcare to everyone.
Yeah, because it's very easy to have a mutiny. So you want to make sure that people are happy and healthy.
I think they were pretty ahead of their times.
Yeah.
And they experimented with lots of interesting ideas that ended up becoming, ironically, parts of the governments that they were running from. And I became interested in this whole universe of pirates after playing the Uncharted games on the PlayStation. There is that, I'm not sure if you ever played Uncharted, but it's kind of like Tomb Raider, but with a male protagonist who hunts for treasures and deals with all of this history of pirates. And to me, it was interesting. These people were explorers, and they were a lot smarter than they get portrayed in films. And that goes back to what you said, that Bond villains are usually very wealthy and arrogant and megalomaniac, and they want to take over the world. And then you have the government good guy who steps in and puts them into their places.
Yeah.
And with pirates, it was kind of the same, except that they were a lot kinder than they get portrayed in media. And there were some of the smartest people around. Like, they needed to know how to navigate, they needed to know foreign languages, they needed to know diplomacy to negotiate and everything. So it was not easy to be a pirate in these days, especially like a captain of a ship. There was a lot of education that was required for you to get to those ranks. And as you said, the mutiny, you needed to really prove your worth to the rest of the crew unless you wanted them to overthrow you, throw you over the board and start some sort of other type of organization.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing.
You just needed
It's
to
such
be
an
very
amazing
good.
history of the piracy. There's a good series on Netflix I started watching, but I just never got to the end of it because too busy. But
I haven't watched Netflix in months.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I know what you're saying.
But there is a series on there about pirates and the history of some of these pirates, as far as the historians can tell. It's really fascinating. Yeah, especially like the around the Caribbeans there in the 17th century, and following the Blackbeard, they follow him and how he became crazy, and that was fascinating. Yeah, and the whole democracy thing and freeing the slaves. They were the big ones for freeing all the slaves. It was amazing. The Central Bank of England had one of the largest slave traders. Actually, lo and behold, they were big slave traders, and they were so upset because the Blackbeard and all these pirate types were just basically knocking over these huge vessels that have 300 slaves on them, and all in the worst conditions, like horrific conditions. And they would onboard these ships, free all these slaves, and then try to onboard the slaves to become with them pirates. They'd also manage to take the ship then and have that as part of the fleet. But as they say, a navy is just a successful pirate.
Right. And I'm really happy that we had this conversation. I know it should be close to midnight where you live, so I don't want to hold you any longer. I know you have busy days ahead of your launch.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's been an absolute pleasure, Vlad, to discuss these things. And really I hope that it opens up conversation and people will, can go against what I'm saying or back me up, or continue the talk of this weird and wonderful world of imagination of how society can live without the initiation of the use of force, utilizing the non-aggression principle, and following a society that starts from first principles of don't hit and don't steal, and seeing how we can solve these complex social issues with non-violence and still have rule of law, but no rulers.
Yeah, and something that I appreciate about you, and sometimes, it can get burdensome. It's time consuming, but we can never have a short conversation, like ever. I've had interviews where after 30 minutes, I'm sort of dragging them to try to at least get 1 hour and ask questions. But I can tell that they're not into it and they just want to get away as fast as possible and reply to my questions and basically leave me without anything else other than trying to switch the topic or trying to get something that gets them to talk. Because, short answers don't really suffice most of the times. But when we talk, it's always this smooth exchange of ideas. And you never notice how fast time passes when you have these conversations. So I appreciate your time. I really much like the input that you provided in this whole conversation about philosophy. And I'm actually curious. I'm going to have Ben Ark also, who's going to talk about the leftist history of libertarianism. He's very much into that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's cool. Well, me and Ben, we have a show that we do every week, and it's amazing how many people just hate on him for being a socialist. And it's funny because if you, the left and the right wing of the bird is the same bird, and really that's why I'm about like just getting rid of the left and the right and sticking to first principles, because I do feel that it's ludicrous to try and fight. But I love Ben's work. He's an amazing architect of ideas, and also of in the Lightning space, he's absolutely prolific, and he's built some of the best tools in the Lightning space that I know of. So I really admire the guy. He's an absolutely lovely, charming gentleman as well. But we definitely differ on philosophical grounds on many areas. And this is what I think is really a big takeaway in the society that we live in now, this cancel culture. We just don't want to hear the other side. We get that offended by anyone that we just want to shut them off. We want to take them down. And I think it's very, very unfortunate, because if you live in an echo chamber, you just, live in that cave where you're looking at shadows the whole time, and that's enough entertainment for you, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it sucks. But at the same time, we have a lot to learn from it. And I'm not sure if we had any precedents for this kind of situation that were not coming from above, like some sort of massive censorship by the Catholic Church or something, the Spanish Inquisition. But those came from above. In our situation, we have I like to call it a culture of Karens. Just people who like to report and feel like they have this responsibility towards everyone else to report and call out everything that they don't like. Not necessarily because it's bad or it does any damage, but because they feel personally offended by it.
Yeah. It's a shocking. But this is why I like going on the show with Ben and also Thomas Hunt and all that, because they're all lefties. But and I'm the crazy. I don't even call myself right wing. Like I can't stand this dichotomy and this sort of paradigm nonsense. But
you're always like one step away from having someone call you a Nazi when you say you're right wing.
Oh, totally! It's terrible, because I grew up as this sort of hippie type, and I just hate the thought of people calling me right wing. But actually, I mean, I'm definitely more sort of, I guess, in a classical terms, more on the right, because I believe in individual freedoms more than the collective. But that's a silly concept too, because I believe in the collective, because that's what makes me as an individualist have a comfortable life, because the collective is happy. I just believe in a different way of achieving collective happiness.
Yeah, and that's where we differ most of the times. It's not the outcome, but the means to getting to the outcome.
Spot on. Well, thanks very, very much again, Vlad, and I hope we can do it again sometime.
Sure. Maybe next season when you come up with some different idea. I really like your pitches.
Awesome.
Golden Bitcoin, 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 golden Bitcoin. Vaultoro. Vaultoro.
Wasabi Wallet's innovative coin joins will make your bitcoins more fungible. So if you accumulate more than 0.1 BTC, you can mix it with other users to remove all traces about their whereabouts. So it's like putting multiple fingerprints on your dollar bills, and it becomes impossible to determine the last few owners of the money. Download Wasabi Wallet today and start coin joining.